So day 2 of our Gut Health Masterclass sees us looking at specific diets. So I was just asking before how everybody got on yesterday and whether or not you guys had used the tracker, whether you found it helpful. If anyone wants to pop anything into the chat box, please do so. So as with anything that we learn, it's what we do with it that will actually deliver the results for us. So really important to keep focused and keep your mindset on these daily tasks, because everything that you do is going to help you move one step closer to achieving what you want to achieve, which I'm assuming if you're on here is your perfect gut health. So today we look at the specific diets, ones that can help alleviate a lot, if not all, of gastrointestinal symptoms such as bloating, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal urgency and pain. So we're going to specifically look at the types of different diets and how to implement them as well, when to use them and how to implement them. So the diets that we're going to be looking at are wheat-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, yeast-free, and then also the low FODMAP diet. And again, it'd be interesting to know if any of you have tried any of these diets, what you have found to be useful for you specifically, and the reasons why perhaps you are following that type of diet. And obviously, if you're working with me on my Transform Your Gut program already, then obviously you will have already been trying some of these diets out and hopefully getting some significant improvements in doing so. So hopefully you have all got your food diary printed out. So this is a really great exercise because it's really going to help you stay focused on what you're eating and keep you on track. And it's also important because it helps us to track our mood, our energy, our bowel movements, and we can also pop in there any additional information. So whilst you're working through this, the additional information could be specific to your bowel type symptoms. So any gastrointestinal issues, you could pop in there as your additional notes. And then this is going to really help you when we move forward into the masterclass. I think day 4, we start looking at food sensitivities. So this will be one of the ways that we can try and identify and highlight some of the areas or some of the different types of foods that you may be struggling with in your diet. So keeping a food diary can be really revealing. So I would recommend, if you haven't printed it out, that you do, and that you take it with you so that when you're eating, you record everything that you eat, you don't miss anything out, and it can be just really revealing in terms of your habits as well. So I'm assuming if you are on here that you are struggling with some kind of gastrointestinal issue. And I'm just wondering, are you ready at the moment to take control? So we went through my credentials yesterday. Anybody who doesn't know me, I am Ruth Tanzi. I have a health clinic. I'm super focused on transforming people's lives through my Transform Your Gut program. And I do different modalities from nutrition therapy, colonic hydrotherapy, all the way through to coaching and yoga. So we ready to take control and get our life back? So obviously the guys who are on here already working with me are. Maybe if you're not working with me and this is something that you want to do, maybe pop a message into the chat box and just let me know where you are right now. It would also actually be good to know, perhaps with regards to your symptoms that you're struggling with at the moment, on a scale of say 0 to 10, where you are at the moment. So how bad in say the last week of your symptoms been? So if you score it from 0 to 10, with 10 being as bad as it can be. And so for me, for those of you who don't know me, I struggled with my gut for the best part of 20 years, in and out of hospital, and just trying everything I could to get my life back. In constant pain, constantly bloated. Bloating was one of the worst symptoms for me. Awful constipation, food reactions galore. So this is why I'm so passionate about letting people know that there is a natural way. If you are not getting any resolution through going to the doctors. If you're sick and tired of the hospital visits like I was, and banging your head against a brick wall, frustrated at not knowing what's causing you your distress, then I do want you to know that there is a way that you can actually identify the root cause and move forward and get rid of your symptoms. So there are many different gastrointestinal type symptoms. So here is quite a number of them, but by all means, this isn't all of them. And what we tend to find with any IBS type presentation is that sometimes they can be really bad. We'll have like a flare up and then things will settle down and we'll think, oh, I'm okay for a bit, and then they'll flare up again. And quite often it's frustrating because we can't identify what it is that's caused this flare up. So I just want you to know that that is normal. That is a normal cycle with IBS type symptoms. Some people are more able to identify the causes, so they will know if they've maybe had some chocolate or milk or a piece of toast, whatever it might be. They know what their triggers are and they know that that's going to cause them the distress. Other people, like for example myself, although I had multiple food intolerances for a long time, I felt like I was intolerant to everything, and it kind of became that way because I did end up developing a leaky gut. So one food reaction can damage the gut wall and can lead on to further ones. So we don't want to be kind of ignoring symptoms, because at the end of the day, it's the body's way of communicating with us that there is a problem. So we don't want to ignore. We want to be listening, paying attention and looking out for what it might be that's actually causing these issues for us. So if you have any of the previously mentioned symptoms, I want you to not ignore them. So we do need to seek advice because they don't go away on their own. And they can end up leading on to more serious conditions. If we do end up developing a leaky gut, then that can lead on to autoimmune condition. An autoimmune disease, if it's related to the gastrointestinal system, is irritable bowel disease, such as Crohn's or colitis, and they are not pleasant to have. And we can end up with a lot of malnutrition, a lot of pain, a lot of time off work, a lot of time in bed, not socializing or going out, and just being really, really miserable. So autoimmune conditions, for anyone who isn't aware of them, is when the body actually starts to attack itself. And quite often that is because it's mistaken whatever antigen is in there as an invader. And it might be that that is a certain type of food. So that could be wheat, it could be gluten, dairy, it could be, none of those that we've mentioned, but those are the ones that seem to cause the most distress for people. So the different types of diets for IBS, when we are looking at those, we also want to be aware that we cannot heal the body and we cannot expect the body to heal if we continue to pollute it with bad food, with too many stimulants, with white carbohydrates, with sugar, with dairy, wheat, gluten. These are the sorts of things that can really set up the environment in which our state of our gut is just going to progress for the worse, unfortunately, not for the better. So we do need to get rid of these types of products. And I would say, if your diet is consumed with all these products and it feels quite maybe even stressful or distressing to you to think about, oh my goodness, like this is my diet, what am I going to eat? I am more than happy to talk you through and give you some guidance with that. And it might be for you that it's just taking baby steps, that it could be overwhelming to do everything at once if you're so used to, ready meals, you're not used to cooking. And we want to take the stress away as well, because stress just exacerbates everything. So taking baby steps, minimizing processed foods, minimizing the sugar and the white carbs, and slowly introducing whole grains and slowly reducing the wheat and the dairy, that might be a way to eventually get to that healthy diet that you need in order to move forward with your gut health. So everyone just moves at a different pace. There's no right or wrong. So when we look at a gluten-free diet then, so specifically wheat seems to be a real issue for so many people. I find when I tend to remove it for my clients that we do see some really great results. And a lot of the reasons for wheat being an issue, A, because it contains a lot of gliadin, which we'll come on to, which is a protein element of gluten, but B, because of the way the grain is now grown, because it's such a popular staple food crop, the growers manipulate the grain in order to get this higher yield because of the demand that we place on them. And in doing so, our digestive systems just no longer recognize wheat, and therefore it's very difficult then to digest if the body can't recognize it because it doesn't know what to do with it. So that is one of the reasons why wheat, or modern wheat, should we call it, is such an issue for so many people. And gluten as well. So gluten is very difficult to digest and can actually encourage the growth of unfriendly bacteria. And these bacteria can produce these toxic byproducts. And then as they do that, they also produce a lot of gas. So that can be why when we have wheat or gluten in the diet, that we get these awful gastrointestinal type symptoms. Also with the modern wheat, there has been research to suggest that it's the first trigger in autoimmune conditions such as your irritable bowel diseases, but then also things like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis as well. So any type of autoimmune condition, if anybody has a familial history with that or is suffering from that themselves, then wheat gluten is definitely not something that we want to have in the body, because this can just continue that destruction of the gastrointestinal system and just prolong the effects of ill health, basically. So gliadin, like we said, is the protein that's found in wheat, which comes from gluten. And this is the intestinal irritant. And this is generally what the body is reacting to. So if we are following a gluten-free diet, then all of these products, and you probably look at this going, oh my goodness, like literally can I eat anything? Like all my favorite foods are in this list: biscuits, pizza, waffles, pasta. But there are so many good alternatives on the market. I mean, gosh, if I think back to, I don't even know what year it would have been when, you know, we didn't have any gluten-free type products. And don't get me wrong, you know, majority of the gluten-free products on the gluten-free aisle, I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. But there are some decent alternatives out there. So it isn't anywhere near as restrictive now as what it would have been years and years ago if you had to embark on a gluten-free diet, say due to celiac disease or something similar. So what to look out for on labels. So wheat can be presented as flour, semolina, graham flour, durum semolina, wheat, gluten, wheat starch, farina, bran. There are so many different types, but when you're out and about in the supermarket, they're labeled well. So they'll say wheat-free, gluten-free, so you don't need to be too concerned. It's more when we are going out, when we are allowed out again, and we start getting back into society and we are purchasing things from, I don't know, maybe a takeaway or going out to a restaurant. We need then to be aware of these different types of wheat that we can find when we're eating out. So I just took a couple of labels off a shopping website. I think it was Ocado. So bran flakes, for example, you have whole wheat in there, and then you've got wheat bran. And then, for example, whole wheat pasta, it's durum wheat semolina, but they've all got wheat in there. So these are just things to be aware of, because it can confuse a lot of people who aren't used to really following these types of diets. But you all have received, hopefully, the handouts for the gluten-free, wheat-free, and also for the dairy-free diets as well. So you can refer to those. So you want to, when you're out and about, suspect anything that's thickened, basically, to contain an element of gluten in there, because generally that tends to be the case. So things like your puddings, processed meats, also ice creams, chocolate, not always. Generally it doesn't have, but some chocolate can have, as can cocoa. Soy sauce, we have the alternative, which is gluten-free tamari. Beer is generally containing gluten unless it says gluten-free, and then lots of medicines and tablets as well, unfortunately, also do contain gluten, so just something to be mindful of. So do we need wheat? Let me know in the chat if you actually think that we need wheat. So I get asked this question a lot. I think people think that if we remove wheat from the diet that we're removing this huge food source, but generally speaking, that's because they have been so used to having it in their diet. Maybe they're having toast for breakfast or a cereal that contains wheat. Maybe it's that they're having a sandwich at lunchtime and maybe some pasta in the evening. But there are so many alternatives to wheat now that actually we don't need to have it. There are so many different, better, less destructive grains that we can introduce into our diet. So let's have a look in the chat and see what people are saying in here. I think, hopefully that one has been answered before. So I'm hoping you can all still hear me okay. Maybe you could let me know in the chat. So Tara's avoided wheat for 15 years and made a massive difference to her health. So that's good, really good. Because it just can be just so problematic. So dairy-free as well. Dairy is another one that's so difficult to digest. And a lot of that is to do with this intolerance to lactose, which is the milk sugar, but it can also be an intolerance to casein, which is the milk protein. So it really does depend whether it's an enzyme deficiency or whether it's an actual sensitivity to the protein found in dairy. But when we're going to switch to a dairy-free diet, it is important to look out for anything that contains cow's milk. So how to read the labels for milk-free diet. I'm not going to go through all of these because you do have them in the handout. But I thought I'd just pick out a few. So obviously we said casein is the protein. So some people will really struggle to digest casein, and the knock-on effect of that could be then the urgency quite often. It could be that they develop a skin rash, that they bloat straight away. For some people, it might even be that they get constipation or quite a lot of pain. Abdominal related pain. Sometimes it can even go to the joints. So dependent, if there's a leaky gut element, then quite often that we will see that there is also other areas of the body that start to become painful. So joints is one of those. And so obviously custard and cream are obvious. Ghee, clarified butter. So some people tolerate this better because ghee is basically melted butter. So when we melt the butter, we get the liquid fats and then we get the milk solid. So the removal of the milk solid will reduce the lactose element of butter. And therefore, for some people, they find that they can tolerate ghee more so than they can butter. The other protein in milk is whey. And I know a lot of people who I've worked with in the past who have used whey in the form of the protein shakes, and maybe have had 2 or possibly even 3 on a day when they're training in a bid to increase their protein to help with their training. And unfortunately, what has happened is that they've just become incredibly bloated. That is the key one that I have experienced through my clients with whey, that they have really experienced a heck of a lot of bloating with using whey. And then all the lactose, so lacto or lactal, anything that starts there is all to do with dairy. So lactoalbumin and lactoglobulin are both protein. Lactoferrin is the main, is what's colostrum basically from the initial part of the breast milk from the mother. And then we've got lactose, as we know, the milk sugar, and then lactulose, which is the indigestible milk sugar that is used for constipation. So clearly, if you have an intolerance to dairy, you do not want to be going on to lactose. So let's just have a pop in the chat and see. Let's see what anybody else is saying. So some people haven't got the diet handouts. So that should have come along with the link today. So you should have had the email that's come through for today with handout 1 and 2. But if you haven't, just email me after and I will for sure just email those over to you. So don't worry, you can get those. So with milk, we have lots of different derivatives. So we've got the malted, the condensed, evaporated, that I remember from childhood. I also remember the condensed. Gosh, how sickly sweet was that? The dried milk. And then even, I know some of my clients have been confused in the past with kind of whole milk, low fat, non-fat and skimmed, thinking that they have less cow's milk in them if it's skimmed, which isn't actually the case. It just has less of the fat in there. And then goat's milk. So if you're following a dairy-free diet, especially in the initial stages, I would say avoid goat's milk because it so closely resembles cow's milk that your body could react to it. It would be one that I would probably suggest trying after we've gone on an avoidance diet and everything settled down, that maybe try the goat's milk first if that's something that you like, because it can be gentler on the system as well. And then we have all these other dairy-free ones or ones that contain dairy that we need to look out for if we're following a dairy-free diet, should I say. So also we need to be thinking about non-food sources. So lots of beauty products, body lotions, cosmetics, medicines and supplements do contain sources of dairy. And then the food sources, like we've said, chocolate, cheese, cereals, gravy sauces, and also seasonings. So reasons for going dairy free. So the main one is this lactose intolerance, and this can present, you know, anything from bloating to sinus congestion to fatigue to awful urgency when we have lactose intolerance. So this, like I said before, is when we don't have the enzyme lactase to break down the lactose. So if we don't have that, then we are always going to react. You can try a digestive enzyme that has the lactase in it to see whether that will help you. So you could try taking that at the beginning of a meal, and that can often be beneficial if you're wanting to have dairy. And then also these IgG immune reactions to cow's milk. So this is when the protein from the cow's milk escapes through the bowel wall and then gets into the bloodstream. And then this sets up a reaction in the blood where the whole system just overreacts, thinking it's an invader. And then we get whatever symptom it is for us. So different symptoms for different people. So that can be also why it's difficult to identify what's going on. And they're not always immediate. They can, with IgG, it's generally speaking a couple of hours to a lot longer after you have eaten or drank a food that is irritating to you. Often people will go on a dairy-free diet just for health reasons because of the high fat content. A vegan diet, obviously, they're not going to have dairy. And then things like skin issues. A lot of my clients who have presented with psoriasis, eczema or acne have resolved their issues within 2 to 4 weeks through coming off dairy and just letting the whole system calm down. Generally speaking, there does need to be a gut healing protocol in place rather than just removing the dairy if said person would ever want to try to include them again. Because a lot of the time, if we are intolerant or if we are reacting to any type of food, we need to calm the system down. We need to remove that food, but we also need to set about healing the gut because quite often it has become damaged. And we don't want anything else to progress moving forward. And then sinus problems as well is another key reason for going dairy free. So lactose intolerance, like I said, that's the main reason why people tend to go dairy free. And this occurs when the small intestine doesn't make enough of the enzyme lactase, which is needed within the body to break down or digest the lactose. So symptoms can be mild or severe. I know mine were pretty severe when I was really struggling with cow's milk. 30 minutes actually to half an hour to 2 hours after eating or drinking can be what people tend to experience. And then, oh, here we go. Here she is. Let me just remove the beautiful Isis. Down you go, baby. She loves coming on Zoom. So yeah, lots of different symptoms that we can have from having dairy. So, you know, gurgling, rumbling, pain, cramps, diarrhea, constipation, vomiting, you know, you name it. We can have so many different symptoms there. So dairy obviously is a rich source of calcium, and this is why a lot of people perhaps don't want to remove it from the diet. And it can also be a struggle, I know, with children who, for example, don't eat their greens or can't have nuts and other things that contain decent levels of calcium in order to replace that. So yes, and also phosphate as well. So it is important that if we are removing dairy, that we're mindful of the fact that it is a rich source of calcium, and that we do need to get that calcium from somewhere else. And we're going to be looking more specifically tomorrow at different alternatives and what we can implement into our diets to make sure that we offset any of the nutrient deficiencies through not having dairy. And the other key one to also know is that we do need vitamin D to actually absorb calcium, and majority of people in the West are vitamin D deficient. So that is something also to be aware of. Let me just pop into the chat. Oh, Myra's gone, I think. I didn't see that before. So Anne-Marie, on dairy-free diet for 5 years and best decision in my life. That's so good. And no, she hasn't had the handouts either. What's going on? Right, I will look into that for people. I'm not sure what's going on there. So do we need dairy? I would say no, we don't. As long as we are getting the replacements for the calcium and we've got adequate vitamin D in order to absorb the calcium, then we don't need dairy. We just need to be aware of what it is that we need to put into our diet in order to make sure that we have calcium and enough calcium in the diet. But we'll come into that in more detail tomorrow. So low FODMAP then. So low FODMAP diet, acronym for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. What a mouthful. So these are short chain carbs and sugar alcohols that are really poorly absorbed in the small intestine, and unfortunately result, generally speaking, in a lot of bloating. And if it's related to SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and either the presentation then of hydrogen gas or methane gas, we either have diarrhea or constipation. So low FODMAP, we tend to follow if there is a presentation of lots of bloating. If we know that we do have a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and we can test that through a breath test. Also with the GI effect stool test that I use, there are certain markers in there that would indicate whether or not there is potential SIBO that would warrant further investigation. So that is a reason basically to follow the low FODMAP diet if we are struggling with bloating and if we know that we have this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So the bacteria in the small intestine, it isn't that it's bad bacteria by any means, it's actually commensal bacteria, but it shouldn't be there. So the majority of our bacteria resides within the colon, and that's where we want it to be. We want it to be in the colon. We don't want it in the small intestine, because when it is, that is when we can get this bloating, because that is where the majority of our digestion takes place. So we want the bacteria to be in the part of the bowel where the digestion doesn't take place, and therefore there isn't as much food for the bacteria to feed on in order to cause all these issues that we may experience. So these are your high FODMAPs in alphabetical order. So things like artichoke, asparagus, all the way down to avocado, grapefruit, cherries, mangoes. So these are the things that if we were following a high FODMAP diet, we would want to be making sure that we either reduced or in the early stage maybe cut out. And again, we'll go into more detail tomorrow about how to implement a low FODMAP diet if that's something that you want to try. And see. So do we need FODMAPs? Unfortunately, yes, because if you look at that list of the high FODMAPs, what amazing foods were on there. Loads of prebiotics, loads of healthy fats, just amazing variety. So unfortunately, what can happen when people get the wrong information, they stay on a low FODMAP diet for too long. 6 weeks ideally should be the maximum amount of time following the correct protocol to get rid and eradicate whatever is going on for said person. When they stay on for too long, it disrupts the microbiome, unfortunately, and that can be detrimental to the whole health of the gut. So yeast-free plan then. So we follow a yeast-free diet if we have a yeast infection. So if we know we've identified, maybe we've got candida or another type of yeast infection, and again, this would come up on a stool test, or it might just be that we know because we've got so many symptoms, we're perhaps having recurrent thrush. We would want to be looking at following a yeast-free diet to make sure that we're not giving the yeast infection any more nutrition, any more food that it needs, the energy in order to grow and develop and take over your system. So things like beer, unfortunately, go, and bread, and then the key one is sugar-feed yeast, like you would never know, and anything fermented. So, and again, we will come on more specifically to a specific yeast-free diet for anybody who is perhaps thinking they may have a yeast infection, or they know they have a past history of candida and they still have flare-ups now and again. So don't forget, if you're wanting to see whether or not we can work together, if you're wanting to get in control of your gut health, say bye-bye to your awful symptoms and start living 2021 the way you want to, don't forget you can book in for your initial exploratory consultation with me, which is free. So it's a half-hour consultation, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you. So day 2, Gut Health Masterclass giveaway. So I love this book, Get the Glow. So many amazing recipes. Madeline is incredible. I have been inspired by this book, one of my favorites. So this is the giveaway today. And I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep a note each day, because I just draw them kind of like out of a hat at the end of each of the Zooms. Anne-Marie, in fact, you won yesterday. So you won, I think it was the, where is it? Food. I think it was a food diary review. But what I will do at the end of tomorrow, I will announce the winner for today. And by the end of the masterclass, I will email to everybody so that everybody knows what everybody has won. And then I can just get your addresses in order to get these sent out to you.